So today I see this meeting, the goal of this meeting and this discussion is to share and to discuss our experience related to our first research paper, related to how we tried to write our first research paper, what kind of problems, difficulties we had for this in doing that, and moreover how we tried to publish it. Those who still did not try to publish a paper, so I think this meeting will be useful and perhaps it will help you to avoid some typical mistakes. And my goal is to try to share my mistakes, to discuss my experience. Basically, the plan is the following. So I'm going to in general discuss challenges we face then trying to write and publish our first paper. So for me, it was quite painful, I would say, to take a look at my first paper. It's now I would rewrite it completely, and it was painful, but quite useful in terms of like what we should not do, for instance, when we prepare our paper, and especially when we prepare the introduction. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about in general challenges. I'm gonna, hopefully you will share your challenges, your difficulties you face then writing and trying to publish your first papers. Okay, and guys, maybe I hope my discussion and my views, it's highly related to economics, of course, and perhaps to social sciences. And I still hope it will be useful for those whose field perhaps not in economics or quite far from economics, but I'm not sure about that. So things I'm going to share, they're perhaps relatively specific to economics and to social sciences, okay? So please keep this in mind. And sometimes perhaps you think, okay, this guy is telling us some, strange things that are not really, specific to my field. So then in this case, I apologize in advance. So again, there'll be some relatively big bias towards economics, issues we have in economics, and things we need to take into account then we prepare our paper for publishing. Okay, so then the next thing to do is to discuss one of the most important parts of our papers is introduction. So I very relatively briefly try to share my strategy in writing an introduction, how I see that, and perhaps you can also share your experience, your thoughts. We perhaps can come up with some interesting solutions. Then I'm gonna, this is what I started. I'm gonna share my experience related to my first published paper. Will be some hopefully interesting exercises and that would lead to some interesting discussions. I'm going to discuss some potential points from improvement, take into account my current experience, and you can imagine. So I published this paper in 2009. After many years, after several years, not many, but several years of trying to publish it in different journals. So basically I wrote it, I think, in 2007 and 2006. Okay, that was the first draft. So it's, I don't know how many years ago, it's 16, I think, yeah, 16 years ago. And finally, a QA session. So I'll be happy to talk to you to discuss any your questions, concerns, again, experience. First paper, challenges. So let me maybe tell you about my personal experience, which is actually it's related to the first comments. So my research is not interdisciplinary. So in contrast, like it was basically the problem of how to sell the paper. So economists know this problem. Basically, it's not for us just write a paper and then submit to a journal. Then they say, okay, it's a good paper. They accept it after some corrections and revisions, or we don't like it. For economists, and I suspect that perhaps it's also true for some other social sciences, it's important to sell a paper. So, and in my case, at least again, in my case, I started as a theorist, and my first paper was a pure theoretical paper. And the strategy, like basically the way I started writing this paper was not like first I asked interesting research question, and then I started trying to address this question, trying to, to go deeper regarding this question and so on. Basically what I did, and this is sort of, at least I know many of my classmates, not all of them, but many of my classmates at my PhD, so basically followed this same strategy. So basically, especially theorists, you take a certain model, then you try to introduce some new feature. You expect that it could be interesting, but you have no idea. Basically, you have no idea what kind of results you might have, and whether those results will be interesting. And then, okay, it's a lottery. You can come up with some interesting things, and then, or maybe it will be just wasting of time. You do not derive anything important for the field, and then it's basically you move on to some other ideas, other papers. So my case was exactly like that. So I considered a certain well-known model, I introduced a certain feature, and then I established a number of results, and I decided, okay, these results are sort of relatively interesting. I believe they're interesting for the audience, and then I tried to kind of write a paper based on that. And the difficulty, it's exactly what Ivan mentioned. It's really to sell the paper and to see, and let me now move to the slide, it's to understand what I have done, actually. And it's really hard question, especially if you start not with a clear research question, then it's quite clear how to motivate your research. If you start with some digging around a certain model, a certain results, then the question is, what I have done is a complicated question. And basically then you start writing an introduction, you really realize that, so I'm pretty sure, at least this is my case, then you write the main body of the results without an introduction. You do not completely understand what you have done in the paper, what's the contribution, what's the main result. And then you start writing an introduction. This is kind of the way to really, really understand all the paper, all the results. And in the introduction, this is kind of some smooth move towards talking about introduction. So for me, it was, I really needed to understand what's my main result, because I had a lot of results. It was difficult to place into the literature because I did not have initial motivation. It was just, again, playing with a certain model, playing these new things. And of course, based on that main result placement into the literature, we basically moved to what we really like, at least in economics, this word contribution. So basically, for me, to summarize, it was very hard to, at the beginning, to understand my contribution, and next to write a proper introduction that emphasizes my contribution. And actually, later we were gonna talk at my text. It's not that nice, and now I'm kind of, then I read this paper, I realized that I still didn't manage to place it into the literature in the right way to emphasize the results. So basically, and therefore this first paper was not actually published that well. But still, it's a very good example of problems, challenges, and issues researchers at earliest stage of their career can face. Okay, introduction. So we need to sell a paper. We need to convince the reader that we have a nice paper. Okay, so one of my professors at Penn State University actually told us that then you present your paper, then you write your paper in economics. Actually, you need to think in a very simple way about the following. You have a certain toy, and as soon as you kind of write your paper, they believe that you like your paper, you like playing with your toy. And then in your introduction, in your paper, you would like to convince the reader that your toy is so cool, and the reader is supposed to want to play with your toy as well. Okay? So this is exactly the words of my professor and one of my professors at Penn State. And this is what, it's not easy to follow, but this is what I try to follow then, at least presenting my papers and writing introductions for my papers. So introduction, it's an important part. Referees, Arseny, going back to your comments, referees really like reading abstract, the introduction, basically, they almost, I would say, they have almost made a decision about your paper. I'm pretty sure about that. So at least they either like it, and maybe there could be some issues, but we'll be tolerant to them, or they don't like it, and perhaps their paper is quite cool, but initially if they don't like it, they will be really biased negatively, and you know from all our experience. So this is quite important. So how to write a good introduction? I would say, again, emphasizing that my points are highly related to economics. So I would say that writing a cool introduction in economics is art. So it's really, it's not just, okay, I'm going to write it, I'm done. I mean, I know English, I can write in English, I know what I have done in my paper, so then I just describe it in the introduction and the end of the story. No, it's really art, and it's very important. So I know many examples then, very good papers were not written in a nice way, and they're not published accordingly to the level of the results in this paper. And follow-up papers, they did not contribute that much into this field compared to these original ones. However, they were written the perfect way by top guys. Introduction super interesting, all the text is great, you enjoy reading this paper, and then they were published in the top journals. Since we know that there was something else before, not that nice in terms of writing, in terms of introduction, in terms of delivering the idea, and the publication outcome was not that great. It was okay, but not that great. And I know really many examples of that. So it's, again, going back to introduction is art, in my opinion. And again, talking about myself, I'm definitely not a good artist. So so therefore, I don't know, maybe it's really learning by doing, and it's 10 or even more years of practicing is not enough. Maybe in 20 or 30 years, I'll be closer to some sort of good artist in terms of writing introduction. But at the moment, I'm not, for sure. And therefore, I follow a very simple scheme for my introduction. Very simple plan. For me, it works. Typically, guys, I do not have, going back to my experience, these submissions, these referees, these reports, typically I do not have questions related to my introduction. For instance, like saying like your introduction is bad, it's not clear, we have no idea what you are doing. No, usually I don't have. Of course, it can be the case that referees say, okay, your contribution is not enough, they don't like your paper, it's perfectly fine, it's fair enough. We face this everywhere. However, still, I follow just a simple scheme. And here, so I would share my approach to writing introduction. Typically, what I do, I just focus on two first paragraphs. And these first paragraphs should cover two main things. The first paragraph, and it's really like, in my case, it's really just very, very straightforward. I always use this plan. So first paragraph is the motivation for my research topic. From the first paragraph, guys, they need to learn that the topic, the research topic you consider in your paper is interesting and important. Second, the second paragraph is what I'm going to do in the paper in brief, addressing this research question, this research topic. Okay, so basically, again, it's the search topic, and this is how I'm going to address it, what I'm going to do in my paper regarding this research topic. And these 2 paragraphs should basically, it's in some senses an extended abstract that should convince the reader that what you're doing is at least interesting, it's worth reading further, it's worth reading the main body of the paper, all the results, and so on, so on, so on. If you, in my opinion, again, I'm also a referee, and I refereed many papers. And typically, if I'm not convinced by the first page of the introduction, typically, I'm not convinced at all. In general, I'm not convinced after reading the whole paper, and typically my decision is rather it's likely to be more negative than positive about this paper. And then after these 2 paragraphs, you're going to talk more about what you do. There's a little bit more details. If it's a theory or empirics, you discuss your results. Perhaps you discuss the importance of your results regarding policy implications. And then at the end, the literature review. Okay. So basically, this relatively simple plan of writing introduction helps me a lot. I just follow it. And clearly, my introductions could be much better, but in terms of like trying to play with some blocks, you know, guys, there are artists in our field who can play with sentences, blocks, and I just admire those people. And some of them are my co-authors, but I cannot do that, at least at the moment. So I just follow this plan. Going back to my experience, sometimes I was asked, especially then I was on the market. So again, we'll share some my other experience, and then I was on the market. People asked me about my research and I was supposed to kind of to use just 1 minute talking about my research. Okay, so it was sort of like a very quick exercise to prepare for a job market, American job market, and why it's important. Imagine you short meeting like in the evening, some people that from universities that can hire you, you have 1 minute and you should deliver the message of your paper in a super clear way. And this helps. It's super difficult. Again, talking about your research in 1-2 minutes. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I didn't manage, and I'm still not sure I will be able to do it right now. But the point is that if you can do that, then I think you can write 2 paragraphs. This all your contribution at the beginning. This is going back, Ivan. So again, perhaps, yeah, it's hard, but introduction is the matter of taste. It's very personal thing, but in general, at least in my view, and don't consider like poor, like really an advice. It's more like sharing again. So it's good to see the main point, at least on the first page of the introduction. It's hard to, read, then several pages, especially if introduction is long, several pages of reading, you're a little bit boring, and then you still don't see what's going on. And it's a little bit irritates. Yeah, it can be some minus that can be crucial in the final decision. Okay, but again, that's more like my feeling. But sometimes it's difficult, I totally understand, to say everything you want to say just in several sentences at the beginning. You start describing everything, but we should try, guys. There is a text in the chat regarding, you can read it. So basically it's about, as I understood, abstract annotation. And then should we make it more detailed in the introduction? So like, again, so here I'm talking about economics because my experience is related to economics and I'm not sure what's going on in other fields, but in economics, what we have a very short abstract, like up to like 100 words, for instance, which is almost nothing. It's just to get a very, like just a little bit about the paper and idea. And then the introduction, it's really about what you do in this paper. So we don't have long annotations. Abstracts are very short. And basically, in this case, we are supposed to describe what we do in the introduction. And taking into account, maybe one more quick comment regarding that, the size and what we should discuss in the introduction. Imagine there's so many papers around. How you read the papers, but basically, for me, it's first an abstract, and then if I see that it's interesting or highly related to what I'm doing, then the introduction. And then this paper is on hold till I really need to read the main body for my research. This is my strategy. Otherwise, I'm not able to read all the papers. It's crazy. It's so many of them. Many of them are really important and interesting. So it's the matter of time constraints. So therefore, if you write a paper, it's good to have a nice introduction. So later, if necessary, people who read your paper, return to your paper, use it somehow and cite it later. Okay. So this is what we have in our field. So then let me move on to my experience, some exercise. I think so for more senior colleagues, it will be perhaps obvious all the problems. Some of them have been already mentioned. So I encourage younger colleagues to participate and try to sort of criticize what I'm gonna show you. You had a handout. So this is the introduction, or not the introduction, the first paragraph of my introduction, my first paper. It's really how it was published. So it's not like some version that has been changed. This is exactly how it was published. And clearly, guys, so again, it's some things clearly specific to economics, and for those whose field is different, perhaps it will be hard to criticize it because you don't see, all the potential issues related to the field. Take your time reading. Basically, my question is, what do you like about it and what do you not? So that's kind of what I want to show you step by step why everything is bad, just besides the last several sentences. It's not the whole introduction, it's the first paragraph. And two comments are the following, and we are go a little bit further. So I will switch to my slides and basically you will see what I'm talking about. So it's there is no sense in citing, and basically I'm going to repeat it a little bit later one more time. So there is no sense to cite these papers, at least in my opinion. They're super general in the first paragraph. They're super general. They're not really related to what I'm doing. It's just some facts from the literature on income distribution. And this is, I do not exactly remember, but my plan was, okay, I'm going to talk about income distribution. Let's convince the reader that it's a super cool thing, income distribution in general. Okay. So I came up with everything, it's many, seminal papers about income distribution, and I put them into the first paragraph. It's not a literature review, Evgeny, actually. It's just citations that shouldn't be there. Okay. Regarding the literature review, personally, I would prefer. I prefer personally to write the literature review at the very end of the introduction. Again, going back to my comment that writing an introduction is art. I know many people who are playing with the literature review. They're placing different references in the right places through the whole introduction, and they do it in a so cool way So you just reading this introduction, you enjoy it, and you understand everything. I cannot do that, okay? So therefore, my strategy is to discuss, okay, I mentioned the first paragraphs like motivation and contribution. Then I discuss the results, technique. Maybe I emphasize a little bit more the importance, or I say, okay, I develop particular technique, or maybe estimating strategy if it's empirics, or like new model if it's theory. And only at the end, I talk about the literature review. And in the literature review, and I think this comment will be especially important for young colleagues, the purpose of the literature review is not just to show that you know the literature. And basically, you see this paragraph, I kind of show that I know the literature on income distribution. I mean, come up. Who cares what I know? To be honest. Yeah, the purpose of the literature review is to emphasize the contribution of the paper. There you show, you say directly in the literature review that you contribute into several strands of the literature. You explain why, you cite papers, and you say that those papers, and you shouldn't say that those papers are bad and my paper is good. That's one more actually very good comment. And because I did it in one of the previous versions of this first paper, I criticized previous papers, never criticize previous papers. Always say those papers are good, but my paper is better in this particular way, and this is my contribution. Okay, so this is my strategy. There is a question in the chat. Does it make sense to write that the author consider this topic like being important because of? I would not use such wording. I would not use sentences like, I think this topic is important because, basically, this is, again, going back to my comment regarding the literature review, this is exactly the purpose of the literature review. Through the literature review, you should show that your topic is important and your contribution is significant. And how you do that, you show, okay, there are papers that did something, I do more than that because of, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but please avoid, at least, again, emphasizing, repeating many, many times, and this is one more time, it's specific to my field. I would never use that words that I believe it's important. Okay, why? Because I mean, there are so many opinions, and then the referee reads, okay, this guy thinks it's important, I do not think so. It's like basically, come up, it's a really red flag. It's like, it irritates a lot. So try to avoid this overselling. And I'm saying, okay, super important. Try to convince the reader using the literature review. And especially if you cite seminal, well-known papers, recent papers, and then you clear state what's your difference and what's your contribution, it will be more than enough for the most of the referees, okay? Not maybe for all of them, but for the most of them. Let me go back to my slides, and I basically gonna show you why I do not like right now almost all the paragraph, and basically meaning that I would cut it till the last several sentences, okay? Some things we have already discussed. So the first sentence, so we discussed a lot of things, so I would say, let me do the following. So I will ask quick questions, and you have several answers, like a test. Please put in chat like the version of the answer A, B, C. First sentence, what are possible, let me read it. What are the possible consequences of income redistribution from market structure, consumption allocation, and welfare? And my question is it a good question at the beginning of the paragraph, at the beginning of the introduction? Have two relatively different versions. It's an important question that attracts the reader to the paper, A. And B, this question is too general and does not provide relevant information. Let's play this simple game. So let me see what you think. So A, B, and let me provide comments regarding A and B, like sort of how I came up with this beginning. So my point was, I was young, and basically I just, to be honest, I think this is what I read in nowadays in some like master thesis or bachelor thesis, okay, but master thesis, and very often quite often in even PhD thesis. So it's like authors try to attract the reader to the paper, saying something like, stating, for instance, a very general question. For me, like this question is very general. Okay, so let's go back. So what are possible consequences? I mean, so many different consequences. Come on, what do we gain from this question? I mean, it's just, for me, it's a cheap beginning, to be honest. And I was young, and I exactly wanted to attract the reader, stating kind of question, and then I'm gonna go deep into this question. But this sort of, in my opinion, a bad strategy. You should emphasize your contribution and stress your contribution implicitly, and starting with exactly what you do, and through the whole introduction show that what you do is great. And basically, that's kind of the answer I would choose. It may irritate the reader. The reader, the referee, for instance, is an expert, and then if the referees see this question, it irritates because it looks cheap. I mean, I criticize myself, so I can use these words. It's really cheap. So moreover, cheap because actually, unfortunately, it's just one paragraph, and you don't see the whole introduction and the whole paper. However, of course, this paper, this first question, the paper addressed it only partly much later, and basically it's just some very general question which is not highly related to the paper. So I would remove it and put it somewhere late in the further of the statements. And this is sort of some way of reformulating this later, but still the point is, like, to summarize, you should start, if you would like to start with a question, be very accurate with that. Do not try to oversell your paper. Do not try to be like, not cheap, but don't provide cheap questions. Okay, for instance, I mean, if there is a question which is really relevant, like suppose there is a puzzle, okay, and in your paper you do provide a reasonable solution to this puzzle, then perhaps you can say, okay, this question related to the puzzle, and you say it's the puzzle in the literature, and then I'm doing that. But it's not what you saw in the paragraph. Yeah, it's just a general question. So here I would not ask general questions, especially at the beginning. I use this form like questions if it really stresses your contribution, if it's super clear that how it's related to your contribution, and then it makes your contribution stronger asking a certain question. If not, then I would not use this form at all, the form of questions. Okay, it's a little bit, I mean, but it's a very typical mistake at the early stages, and I made this mistake. So, and it looks like, and I saw it, as I mentioned, in many master thesis, PhD thesis. So it's a typical mistake. So be very, very accurate with that. Going back to the comment in the chat. So we might want to start the introduction with general sentences and then move to more detailed description. It depends on an author and paper and so on, and requirement of journal. So I would say it, again, I have to mention that it's in economics. So referees, readers, they don't like general statements. These general statements, it's waste of time. They're experts, they know everything. And showing these general statements, again, for instance, an example like what I see very often in master thesis. Okay, there is a certain question, and the whole paragraph shows like very general words, how it's important. Like, if, for instance, there is a certain research question about globalization, okay, and then the first paragraph of many typical master thesis, it's about how globalization is important for the world. Okay, yes, it's important, but as a reader, I'm an expert. I don't really care about how globalization is important for the world. Reading this particular paper, I care what this paper does. And as soon as I see the whole paragraph of very common general sentences with no direct relation to the results and contribution of this paper, I can, yeah, I will not be happy, by that. So therefore, very typically, then I read master thesis of my students. I just cross the first paragraph. We don't need these general sentences, okay? Perhaps in some fields it's good to provide, certain background, but in economics for sure, it's not a good strategy. I would maybe discuss the second sentence. And then we have already discussed citations on a number of papers. Perhaps then I will move on to some summary. Okay, so the second sentence is, as Atkinson and Bourguignon 2000 argue, it's difficult to think of economic issues without distributive consequences, and it's equally difficult to imagine distributive problems without some allocational dimension. Okay, it's a very nice sentence. I like it itself, not perhaps here. So again, let's play the same game. Here I have more versions for you. So the question is it good to include long citations in the introduction? Yes, yes, it's always good to cite well-known papers. It makes the paper stronger. B, no, it's not a good idea. Such long citations undermine the contribution of the paper. C, yes, but only if the citation makes the argument in the paper much stronger. So please choose your version and let's quickly discuss it and move on. So here I think the outcome is clear, and it's interesting. As soon as you provide the answer, which is not that, direct, like yes or no, but yes, but everybody chooses something in the middle. I would share my opinion. I would say it's C, but basically it's B, but it's C, meaning that if so first of all, long citations in general, even though the guys are legends, and these guys, Atkinson and Bourguignon, are legends. Yeah, exactly followed this strategy. Okay, I should, to make my point stronger, I should cite somebody who is legendary about like distribution again. And again, this sentence is great. I was very happy when I found it, but still, it's not a good idea. Why it's not a good idea? I would personally, again, I would try to one clock citation that it's distracts the reader. It undermines the contribution. It's moreover, it looks almost often quite cheap. These citations, I mean, it's again, you don't talk about your paper. I think the whole message of this meeting, I think it's very good that we see the whole message of this meeting. You should emphasize your contribution, but implicitly playing this the introduction. And this, like using questions, using citations, is an explicit way, kind of, to show your contribution. And typically, it irritates the reader, the referee, and shows that kind of you use cheap arguments. So I would not do that. Still, there are exceptions, and this is why I would choose C. Sometimes it makes sense to include a long citation if it makes the argument in the paper really, really strong. Okay. So for instance, like the example in one of my papers, where we, at the very, very beginning of the introduction, we include a long citation, is then there was a handbook of regional economics, recent handbook, and one of the statements in this handbook is that not much research was done in the certain direction. And this is the statement from the handbook. And in our paper, we do exactly the research in this direction. Okay, in this case, we decided that, okay, we are going to cite it, emphasizing our contribution. And it's kind of saying, okay, we do believe it's super important, but we don't say that we believe. We provide a citation from a seminal handbook and by legends, actually, the authors who are well known in the profession. and where the citation is highly related to to what we do in the paper. Only in this case I would cite. Otherwise, I would try to avoid it because typically, as I mentioned, it looks relatively cheap. I use this word several times just because, then again, being more senior, you see all these tricks, and it's again, you kind of feel about them. It's kind of easy way, in the opinion of the author, to push the paper, but it's not true. Okay, here's some summary, and here maybe several minutes regarding that. So how I would rewrite it. Still now, I mean, it's a little bit hard to understand for, especially as you see just the one paragraph. You have no idea what this paper is about, what I do in this paper, besides a couple of sentences at the end of the paragraph. But how I would do that, and again, it's still not perfect, and I'm not going to read it to you, so you can do it on your own like later. But just to emphasize the key ideas. So I would think about key ingredients of what I'm doing. Okay, not just questions or citations or general things about the role of income distribution. And again, the role of income distribution is, I mean, so many things related to income distribution. It's hard to cover. So I would focus on the key ingredients. In my case, it's the key ingredient. It's the market structure. And market structure is monopolistic competition used in many fields. And I would basically just say that I'm gonna employ a certain market structure, which is important for many fields, and citing a couple of seminal papers in the footnote, not in the paragraph, but in the footnote, not even citing, but just providing links. I mean, citing without really explaining what I'm gonna do. So basically see this and this paper that kind of emphasize the importance of monopolistic competition. The second ingredient in my case, it's income distribution, but why the income distribution plays a role is because I have non-homothetic preferences. Okay, some terminology, guys, those who are not familiar, not a big deal. And in the first paragraph, it's nothing about monopolistic competition, nothing about preference, but it's very important key ingredients, and they deliver immediately the idea of what I'm doing in the paper. And perhaps still the paper is not that good. I totally understand. It's the first paper. It's not great for sure, but still I would be able to deliver my message immediately. This is the motivation that, okay, this market structure is important. The non-homothetic preference is a super plausible assumption. In the reality, we have non-homothetic preferences, and via these channels, income distribution matters via demand side, and I can play this all other sentences. So this is the version I would write. Again, not perfect, because clearly I would need to rewrite the whole introduction, actually the whole paper. But still, this is some version how I would organize it. And now to summarize. So our discussion, very, I think, fruitful discussion. So regarding your first paper, regarding any paper, I think the first thing to do is to understand your main results and your main contribution, how you place it into the literature, what you have done. Okay, it's hard, but it's important. Otherwise, your introduction will be messy. Nobody will understand what you actually try to show as soon as you do not understand it yourself. Okay, find a way to place the paper into the literature. Good introduction is important, motivation, contribution. There were many other very useful suggestions. The literature review, I maybe emphasize one more time. So the literature review should show your contribution. Do not criticize the previous research. It's good. It's always good. The previous research, any paper is always good. Any paper you cite is good. Your goal is to show that your paper is better in certain dimensions, okay? And do not show the knowledge of different existing papers. I mean, clearly you know many papers, but it's not what you are supposed to do in the literature review. Things not to do. Do not use cheap ways to attract readers' attention, especially for young colleagues. I mean, I did. You see, guys, I did exactly like that. So do not use cheap ways to attract readers' attention. Do not oversell your paper. Overselling your paper, an expert will see it immediately. It's a bad. It's not a red flag, but it's a not that good thing. It irritates quite a lot if you oversell your paper. If you say, okay, I'm going to do this, and that, and then you do not do this directly. So no, do not use long citations unless they really make your argument stronger. Okay, so thank you again. It was great to have you around and to discuss